Hey, did you know that in 1919 a serial killer sent a letter to a New Orleans newspaper threatening to murder anyone who didn't play jazz music in their home that night? And the city actually listened. Every bar, every club, and every living room in the city filled with the sound of jazz music, and for the people who didn't own instruments, well, they hired musicians on the spot. Neighbors crammed together around pianos and trumpets, playing through the night until sunrise. And the killer? He kept his word. No one was murdered on that night. But the man who made the threat was never caught, never identified. And to this day, no one knows exactly who he was. This is the story of the Axeman of New Orleans. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to another episode of Hey Did You Know, where we dig up the weird, the forgotten, and the downright strange corners of America. I want to thank everybody who has been watching the videos, who has been commenting. We reached 100 subscribers. We're a little bit over that now. So thank you all. I really hope that you guys are enjoying this content, and from all the nice comments that I've gotten so far, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. But, as always, a quick reminder before we dive in, make sure you like and subscribe and hit the bell so that you get notifications, because you're not going to want to miss another episode that we have coming up soon. We drop every episode every other Wednesday. Both the audio and the YouTube version are coming out on the same day starting this week, every other Wednesday. And make sure you tell me your thoughts on the video. I haven't really gotten too many things to comment about yet, but make sure that you do leave those comments because they could get featured in a future episode. I might answer some questions if you have any. So make sure that you are leaving those comments. But for right now, let's get into our story. The year is 1918. The Spanish flu is tearing through a crowded and bustling port city of New Orleans, killing more than 3,000 people. Hospitals are overwhelmed, and families are burying their loved ones almost faster than the gravediggers can keep up. But it wasn't just disease haunting the Crescent City. New Orleans had spent decades on edge. Ever since the assassination of the city's well-known and widely respected police chief, David Hennessy, back in 1890, a murder that many locals blamed on the Italian immigrant community. Tensions had really never gone away. And now, a mystery killer was making things even worse. He had begun a terrifying campaign of murders seemingly targeting Italian immigrant families throughout the city. And the press ran wild with it. Many outlets sensationalized the crimes, pointing fingers at the mafia and spinning theories about the organized crime, all with little to no evidence to back it up. The city was griped with fear. And then, in March of 1919, the killer apparently decided to introduce himself. A letter arrived at a local newspaper, allegedly written by the killer himself. He called himself the Axeman. He claimed he would kill again at exactly 15 minutes past midnight on the night of March 19th. But he made a strange promise. He said he would spare anyone who was in a home where jazz was playing. And the city played along. And he kept his word. And that letter sparked one of the most unusual theories in true crime history. That the Axeman wasn't killing out of hatred or greed, but he was actually promoting this newly found genre of music called jazz. But before we get into the letter that he sent, let's go back to where this all began, with the murders. The first known attack came on the night of May 23rd, 1918. Joseph Maggio, an Italian grocer, and his wife Catherine were asleep in their apartment in the corner of Upper Line and Magnolia Streets when someone broke in. The killer cut both their throats and struck them with an axe. Catherine died almost immediately, and Joseph, he survived long enough to be found by his brothers, and died minutes later. When the police arrived, they found something strange. The killer had changed out of his bloody clothing before fleeing, leaving them behind at the scene. Also, before leaving, the killer had written a message on the nearby pavement. Quote, "Mrs. Maggio will sit up tonight. just like Mrs. Tony. And nobody knew exactly what that was supposed to mean, but it suggested one thing. Whoever did this had to have done it before. Just over a month later, on June 27th, the Axeman struck again. This time, the victims were Louis Bessemer and his companion, Harriet Lowe. Attacked in the back quarters of Bessemer's grocery store, both were found alive, but critically injured. Harriet left with one side of her face permanently paralyzed, and what followed next was almost as chaotic as the attack itself. Wild accusations flew in every direction. Bessemer was arrested on suspicion of being a German spy, and Harriet, delirious and deteriorating in her hospital bed, eventually named Bessemer himself as her attacker before dying following a failed surgery. Which, to me, doesn't really make too much sense since he was bloodied as well. Did he hit himself with an axe? Nonetheless, he was charged with murder still, sat in prison for 9 months, before being acquitted by a jury in just 10 minutes. The real attacker, of course, was never identified, and it only took less than 6 months for the Axeman to strike again. This time, on August 5th, a 28-year-old Anna Schneider, 8 months pregnant, woke up in the night to find a dark figure standing over her. She was beaten repeatedly across the face and her scalp was split open, and her husband came home from work late that night and found her barely conscious. Remarkably, Anna survived, and 2 days later, she gave birth to the healthy baby girl. But of course, she remembered nothing of the attack. 5 days after that, the violence continued. On August 10th, 2 sisters, Pauline and Mary Bruno, were jolted awake by a commotion coming from their uncle's room next door. When they rushed in, they found their elderly uncle, Joseph Romano, slumped over with 2 deep gashes in his head. They caught a brief glimpse of the attacker as he fled, a dark-suited, heavy-set man wearing a slouched hat, but he was gone before they could do anything. Romano was conscious enough to walk to the ambulance when it arrived, but 2 days later, he died. Police found a bloody axe in his backyard and a panel on the back door neatly chiseled away, which is something that they had seen previously. By this point, as I said in the beginning, the city of New Orleans was gripped with fear. People were reporting axes in their backyards, neighbors were calling the police to report suspicious men lurking in the streets at night, and families were even barricading their doors. A retired Italian detective named John D'Antonio came forward with a theory of his own, that the killer was what he called a real-life Jekyll and Hyde, a normal law-abiding citizen by day, overcome with the overwhelming desire to kill by night. And it was a terrifying thought, but the attacks weren't over, because on the night of March 10th, 1919, nearly 7 months after the last attack, the Axeman resurfaced. This time, his victims were the Cortimiglia family, Charles and Rose to be exact. Italian immigrants who were asleep in their home in Gretna, just across the river from New Orleans, with their infant daughter, Mary. And when the killer broke in through a chisel panel in the back door, he attacked Charles and Rose with an axe, fracturing both of their skulls. And little Mary, she was struck in the back of the neck and killed instantly. A neighbor across the street heard the screams and rushed over. He found the family bloodied and barely alive, and once again, nothing had been stolen. Charles and Rose both survived, but what came next seems very similar to something that we've heard before. When Rose regained consciousness, she pointed her finger at the very neighbor, the man who had rushed over to save their lives, and his teenage son. Now, Charles furiously denied it. The neighbor was a 60-year-old man in poor health, and his son Frank stood over 6 feet tall and weighed more than 200 pounds, far too large to have fit through that chiseled door panel. None of it made sense. But the police arrested them anyway. Frank was sentenced to hang, and his father, life in prison. It wasn't until almost a year later that Rose finally admitted that she had lied, that she had falsely accused them out of jealousy and spite. The men ended up being released, but they had already lost nearly a year of their lives. It was a cruel footnote to an already devastating attack. And that was the last known murder before everything changed. Because just 3 days later, remember that letter that I mentioned earlier in the episode? It arrived, and it was addressed to the people of New Orleans. When it arrived at the office of the Times-Picayune, the editors read it and immediately published it. And this is what it said.
Esteemed mortal, they have never caught me, and they never will. They have never seen me, for I am invisible, even as the ether that surrounds your earth. I am not a human being, but a spirit and a demon from the hottest hell. I am what you Orleanians and your foolish police call the Axeman. When I see fit, I shall come and claim other victims. I alone know whom they shall be. I shall leave no clue except my bloody axe, besmeared with the blood and brains of he whom I have sent below to keep me company. If you wish, you may tell the police to be careful not to rile me. Of course, I am a reasonable spirit. I take no offense at the way they have conducted their investigations in the past. In fact, they have been so utterly stupid as to not only amuse me, but His Satanic Majesty, Francis Joseph, and etc. But tell them to beware. Let them not try to discover what I am. For it were better that they were never born than to incur the wrath of the Axeman. I don't think there is any need of such warning, for I feel sure the police will always dodge me, as they have in the past. They are wise and know how to keep away from all harm. Undoubtedly, you Orleanians think of me as the most horrible murderer, which I am. But I could be much worse if I wanted to. If I wished, I could pay a visit to your city every night. At will, I could slay thousands of your best citizens, for I am in close relationship with the Angel of Death. Now, to be exact, at 12:15 earthly time, on next Tuesday night, I'm going to pass over New Orleans. In my infinite mercy, I am going to make a little proposition to you people. Here it is. I'm very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared whose home a jazz band is in full swing at the time I have just mentioned. If everyone has a jazz band going, well, then so much the better for you people. One thing is certain, and that is that some of you are people who do not jazz it out on that specific Tuesday night, if there be any, will get the axe. Well, as I am cold and crave the warmth of my native Tartarus, and it is about time I leave your earthly home, I will cease my discourse, hoping that thou wilt publish this, and that it may go well with thee. I have been, am, and will be the worst spirit that has ever existed, either in fact or realm of fantasy.
Now here's something that's interesting. Most historians who have studied this case closely believe the Axeman most certainly did not write that letter. Historian Miriam Davis, who wrote The Axeman of New Orleans, The True Story, points out that the letter is written with wit and literary flair that simply does not match the profile of the killer. It references classical mythology, it's theatrical and almost playful. Davis suggests it was more likely the work of a journalist, or a college student, or even a group of pranksters who were just looking to stir up the city. And stir it up they did, because that letter, whether the Axeman wrote it or not, caused an entire city to stay up through the night, filling every street, every bar, every living room with the sounds of jazz, all in the desperate hope to not get murdered. It also gave rise to one of the strangest theories that this case ever produced, And I mentioned it before earlier in the video that the Axeman wasn't driven by hatred or rage or organized crime, but he was somehow killing to promote this newly invented genre of jazz. It made for a great story, and the press ran with it, and over the years it became one of the most repeated details surrounding the case. I mean, look at me, I've mentioned it twice now. But when you look at the full picture, the chiseled doors, the axe left at the crime scenes, and the Italian immigrant victims, the attack stretched nearly a year before the letter is actually written and sent to the press. So the jazz theory falls apart pretty quickly. After the mysterious letter, the Axeman went quiet, and for nearly 5 months there was nothing. The city cautiously exhaled, and some wondered if it was finally over. But it wasn't. On October 10th, 1919, 5 months to the day after the last attack, a grocer by the name of Steve Boca woke in the middle of the night to find a large figure looming over his bed. That would be the last thing that he remembered. Thankfully, he somehow regained consciousness and staggered into the street and was able to make it to his neighbor's house before collapsing. His head had been cracked open, and much like before, nothing was stolen. And again, there was that panel on the back of the door that was neatly chiseled away. Boca ended up surviving, but like so many of the victims before him, he couldn't remember a single detail about the man that had done it to him. And less than a month later, on September 3rd, neighbors of a 19-year-old girl by the name of Sarah Lauman grew concerned when she didn't answer her door. When they were finally able to break in, they found her unconscious on her bed, suffering from a severe head wound, and several of her teeth had been knocked out. Unlike many of the previous attacks, the killer had entered through an open window rather than a chiseled panel. And the weapon, the bloody axe, was found discarded on the front lawn. Sarah, again, survived and remembered nothing. Then came October 27th, 1919. Mike Pepitone's wife was jolted awake by a noise in the middle of the night, and she rushed to her husband's bedroom and arrived just in time to find a large axe-wielding man disappearing out the door. Inside the room, the walls were covered in blood, and a painting of the Virgin Mary hanging on the wall was covered in spatter. And Mike? Unfortunately, he was dead. His wife could only describe the man she had gotten a glimpse of as large, and that was it. That's all she saw. And then, nothing. The Pepitone murder on October 27, 1919 would be the last attack ever attributed to the Axeman. No final confrontation, no dramatic arrest, no confessions. He simply stopped. The man who had terrorized an entire city for nearly 2 years and literally chiseled his way into homes in the dead of night, who had mocked the police in that strange theatrical letter, vanished just as quietly as he arrived. And the city was left with nothing but questions. So who was the Axeman of New Orleans? The honest answer is nobody knows. Over the years, investigators, journalists, and historians have put forward a number of theories. Some believed it was the mafia, a systematic campaign to intimidate or eliminate Italian grocers who refused to pay protection money, which would explain why so many of the victims were Italian immigrants running small corner shops, but it doesn't explain the randomness of the attacks, or why an organized crime enforcer would leave behind a chiseled door panel and a bloody axe, like some sort of personal signature. Others believe the attacks were the work of a single deranged individual, someone living an otherwise normal life in the city, who killed not for money or power, but simply because something inside him demanded it. A real-life Jekyll and Hyde, as I mentioned before. But then there's the Mumfrey story. In December of 1921, more than 2 years after the last known attack, a man named Joseph Mumfrey was shot dead in the streets of Los Angeles. The woman who pulled the trigger gave her name as Esther Albano. But days later, she revealed who she really was. Mike Pepitone's widow. She claimed the man that she had just killed was the Axeman himself, the same man she had glimpsed at fleeing from her husband's bedroom on the night of October 27, 1919. She told the court that Mumfrey had shown up at her door demanding money, and he threatened to kill her the same way she had killed her husband. The jury believed her, and she was acquitted. And when investigators looked into Mumfrey's background, they found something that was hard to ignore. His criminal history in New Orleans, it was long and very dark, deeply tied to organized crime and extortion, and his prison sentences lined up almost perfectly with the gaps in the Axeman's attacks. When Mumphrey was behind bars, the killings stopped, and when he was released, they started again. It was the closest thing to a suspect this case had ever had. But here's the thing. When researchers went to look for official records of Mumphrey's death, police reports, court documents, a death certificate, they found nothing. No record of a Joseph Mumphrey being killed in California at all. Which led to some historians to wonder if Mumphrey's story itself was just another legend. Another layer of the myth wrapped around a case that never seemed to run out of them. So now, my friends, I want to know this. Do you think Joseph Mumphrey was the real person and he was the Axeman? Or do you think the killer is still out there in history books somewhere, hiding in plain sight? Drop your theories in the comments below. Let me know what you think about that. But for now, I want to say thank you so much for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. And don't forget to follow, because you're not going to want to miss the next one. Because next time, we're headed to a quiet town in Colorado, where one man was pushed past his breaking point and turned a bulldozer into something the town would never forget. Until next time, thanks for listening.